quite some period of time, and then put those options up and to the council, and they're the ones that we are consulting with our community.
What options have you had given that you haven't actually, or you aren't putting to the public?
Sorry, what was that?
I said, what options have been suggested for a paint scheme that you haven't put forward?
We put forward the ones that we were shown as the council itself, and we're quite happy with the three that have been put up, and that's the options that are available for the community to vote on. Do you
have a favourite yourself?
Not really. No. I mean, there's three there. There's the sort of one very similar to the existing, a sort of a light whitish colour. Then there's a darker heritage colour, and then there's the rainbow one.
Where does the rainbow one come from?
I think one of the members of the placemaking group, she suggested that colour scheme, and it got favour with the group. So thought it came through to the council as a recommendation to be one of the three options.
Well, technology being what it is, you of course can put up any lighting scheme these days. I mean, Sky Tower is regularly in different colours. If you thought of actually, rather than wasting money on paint, which will wear out and get weather beaten, actually having a lighting scheme.
We're very cautious with our ratepayers' money, and lighting schemes don't exactly come that cheap. And I don't personally think paint's a waste of time and money. With paint you can put something up, and then in a few years' time, if it's getting tatty or getting a little bit worn, or people don't like it anymore, you can change it.
John, I wonder what would happen if the public response gave you the visual equivalent of Boaty McBoatface.
We would put up what they want.
Yeah, you would?
We're democratic here in Carterton.
Okay, I've always thought that when it comes to great civic monuments and public works of art and all that broad area, the really best thing is to find someone who's got wonderful inclusive taste, and give them the job of deciding.
It's the wisdom of crowds, obviously. Thank you very much for your time. That's Carterton's Mayor John Booth. Any suggestions for the Carterton people as to what they can paint their clock tower? Just pass it on to them. Look, we need to just move on now, and it's probably the fun story of the week. Redundancy. It's no laughing matter, but then again, well...
Yes, it is. It is now.
This man's been through it. This is a story about an advertising copywriter, Joshua Thompson, writing on the wall. He gets called to the big meeting, bring a support person. So he brought a clown, 26-year-old Joseph Brosnahan, who came in as his support clown to go through the rather painful meeting.
And the ad guy's got a new job already, right?
He's got a new job already, and
he knows his business.
And the clown sat there just actually making balloon animals.
He's sort of a unicorn. I loved that.
A unicorn. If you had to go into, I'm just thinking, why have a clown? I mean, I was just thinking, why not have a support accountant, the first person you find off the street, an astrologist.
Ninja warrior? That would work, wouldn't it?
A ninja warrior. Have you been through redundancies where you wish you'd brought somebody, or you've been confronted by somebody?
I was thinking it the other way. Where else could a clown be useful? I sit in far too many meetings where a clown would be great.
All right, look, thank you very much for your time. The theme tune coming up there. I'm Giles Beckford. I've been standing in for Wallace Chapman. He will be back tomorrow. Thanks to our guests, Simon Wilson and Carla Mila in the Auckland studio. Coming up, of course, is Checkpoint with Lisa Owen. Ka kite anō.
Te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Tonight, claims that test the credibility of the key complainant in Labour's alleged sexual assault scandal. Are we any closer to the truth? And the Prime Minister details the new inquiry into how Labour handled the complaints. An email trail reveals Southern Response misled the government and was forced to apologise to its minister. And we talk to the lawyer for potentially thousands of quake-damaged homeowners that are now automatically part of a class action thanks to a new court ruling. The former Defence Force chief has admitted giving inaccurate information to the Beehive about an SAS-led raid in Afghanistan. And petrol stations are warning drivers of an imminent fuel price hike.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Lighthearted tēnei. The Prime Minister has outlined further actions she and the Labour Party have taken to address the controversy around sexual assault allegations. As Jacinda Ardern prepares to leave for a 2-week trip overseas, she's still dealing with the fallout of the scandal. The QC brought in a few weeks ago by the party will now focus solely on the complainants and their complaints. Ms Ardern says the party's lawyers have already looked at how the party conducted an earlier investigation of the allegations.
They will now hand that report over to an independent third-party reviewer who will establish a statement of facts around the party process and what complaints were received.
Jacinda Ardern says anyone asked to be interviewed by this latest inquiry, including her staff and ministers, will be cooperating. One of 3 people who investigated the original complaints has engaged a computer expert to prove he never received sexual assault allegations. Simon Mitchell was on the panel established to investigate the actions of a man working in the Leader's office at Parliament. The man in question and the party president both resigned last week. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
One of the complainants insists she made it clear to the panel she was alleging sexual assault, both in person and in written testimony. Through a lawyer, Mr Mitchell has released a timeline of the inquiry and his interactions with the woman involved. He says sexual assault was never raised with him and brought in a computer forensics expert to confirm he never received any such emails. Mr Mitchell also says the allegations were not raised in 2 meetings he had with the complainant. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
An immunisation advisor expects the high demand for vaccines will continue for several months. The outbreak has affected nearly 1,300 people so far this year, of which just over 1,000 are in Auckland. More than 160,000 vaccines have been given out in 2019, 70,000 more than the same period last year. A shipment of 52,000 vaccines arrived over the weekend, and the Ministry of Health says it should start arriving at GPs from Thursday. Lisbeth Alley of the Immunisation Advisory Centre says demand isn't likely to drop anytime soon.
Definitely for the next couple of months, probably. Yes, while public perception of the risk is high, people will keep on seeking immunisation to try and keep themselves as well as possible and prevent measles.
Lisbeth Alley says the workload for general practices has been huge, but district health boards and primary health organisations are providing support. An Auckland developer who billed affordable home buyers separately for driveways and other basics, pushing their houses outside the affordable cap, is being prosecuted. Auckland Council has charged Imperial Homes with 42 counts of breaching the Resource Management Act, and its directors could face up to 2 years in prison. The company was given fast-tracked consent to build homes at Scott Point in Hobsonville under special housing area rules, which meant it had to provide a certain number of affordable homes. Auckland Council's Planning Committee Chair Chris Darby says first home buyers were vulnerable.
The court expects you to file with a good evidence base, and we've brought that evidence base after some exhaustive interviews, and we've come through this extremely thoroughly, and we're confident that we have got a strong case now.
Chris Darby. Imperial said earlier this year that the definition of affordable applied only to the houses themselves, not the landscaping. 8 helicopters have now been deployed to battle a large scrub fire in Dunedin's Western Hills. The fire took hold on the popular Pineapple Track in Dunedin's Flagstaff area shortly before 1 o'clock this afternoon. Several homes have also been evacuated, with fears a predicted wind change may fan flames towards residential areas. Fire and Emergencies Regional Manager Mike Grant says firefighting conditions have now improved, with the temperature dropping and humidity increasing in the past hour. Firefighters will remain on the ground overnight if needed. Motorists have been rushing to petrol pumps ahead of an expected hike in fuel prices in the coming days. Global oil prices have jumped by 18% after drone attacks in Saudi Arabia cut off an estimated 5% of global demand. Local fuel retailers say pump prices here might rise between 5 and 10 cents a litre. Amy Williams reports.
Gull's General Manager Dave Bodger says its service stations have been unusually busy for a Monday. The company imports fuel to Mount Maunganui, and Mr Bodger says it takes less than a week for international price fluctuations to reach our shores. Z Energy, BP and Gull say they will pass on rising import costs to consumers. Mobil says it will not speculate on future fuel costs. The Commerce Commission says it does not monitor retail fuel prices and leaves it to each company as to how it responds to changes in price. Economist Shamabil Yaqub says rising fuel prices will have a huge effect on consumers. Ko Amy Williams-Aho.
The Auckland Council is planning to make up to 160 staff redundant over the next year. The council's chief executive, Stephen Town, says his own staff tell him there are too many layers and too much duplication of effort within the council. He says at least 100 jobs will go and maybe up to 160. There are around 9,600 full-time equivalent staff and more than 11,000 in total. Mr Town says some of the reduction will be through natural attrition, but will also mean de-establishing some roles. It's coming up to 6 minutes past 5. After being dropped from the Silver Ferns at the start of the year, Katrina Rore can hardly believe how 2019 has panned out. The former Silver Ferns captain was wondering if her international career was over after missing out on the Silver Ferns squad that played in the Northern Quad Series in January. But she then went on to lead the Pulse to their maiden domestic premiership title, forced her way back into the national side and went on to win the World Cup in Liverpool. Over the weekend, she added Australia's Super Netball Championship to her list of achievements as part of the New South Wales Swift side, which beat the Nolene Taurua-coached Sunshine Coast Lightning in the final.
It's really crazy. People like, you're going for the treble, 3 titles in 1 year, and how it happened, and I feel like my stars have just aligned, and I've been able to be a part of 3 unbelievable teams. But I don't think it's sunk in. 3 grand finals, 3 gold medals it's a bit ridiculous, to be honest.
Katrina Rore. Elcha Malzbender has produced a gutsy ride to win her second gold medal at the Paracycling Road World Championships in the Netherlands. The Te Awamutu rider has won the women's T1 road race despite a crash on the final lap. Malzbender cracked a tooth in the fall but managed to return to her bike and hang on to win. David Nyanka has made a successful start to the men's world amateur boxing champs in Russia. The double Commonwealth Games gold medalist has comfortably beaten an Austrian opponent and will now face the 5th seed from Russia tomorrow night for a place in the quarterfinals. That's the news.
We've got to get on and do the big stuff that the city really needs at the moment.
It's like addressing our exploding budget.
You've been outvoted on a number of...
No, once on a minor policy.
Live mayoral debates on Morning Report.
Tomorrow, hear Wellington's Justin Lester, Andy Foster and Diane Calvert. Then on Thursday, it's battle of 2 former Labour cabinet ministers, John Tamahiri and Phil Goff in Auckland.
Local issues on Morning Report. Listen and watch it live on rnz.co.nz and other major news websites, Freeview Channel 50 and on Facebook.
Then on 9 to noon, Lucy Morris-Marr, the investigative reporter who first broke the Cardinal George Pell sexual abuse story. And after 10, historian and author Dr. Deborah Lipstadt, who says anti-Semitism is on the rise again from both sides of the political spectrum. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula mainly fine, a few showers tomorrow evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mainly fine, rain tomorrow afternoon or evening. Waikato to Wellington and Wairarapa, including Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Areas of cloud, occasional rain spreading north tomorrow, clearing later in the day. Norwesterly gales for Wellington and Wairarapa tonight and tomorrow morning. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, cloud increasing, heavy rain developing about the ranges and brief rain elsewhere tomorrow morning, then becoming fine. Norwesterly gales tonight and overnight. Bulla and Westland, rain with heavy falls, easing to a few showers tomorrow morning. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers possibly thundery in the south with snow to 400 metres tomorrow. Westerly gales about the coast tonight and tomorrow morning. Chatham Islands, fine today, occasional rain for tomorrow afternoon. RNZ National, it's 9 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. Tonight it's turned into a case of he said, she said, with accusations that core statements made by the key complainant in the Labour Party alleged sexual assault are untrue. Lawyer Simon Mitchell was one of the 3 Labour members on a committee set up to investigate the behaviour of one party member towards others. In a statement released by his lawyer, Mr Mitchell maintains there was no sexual assault complaint made to him, either written or verbal, and any suggestion that he received any such complaint via email is, quote, not credible. Two complainants, including a woman known publicly as Sarah, say they told the committee about sexual assault allegations. And Sarah also told the website Spin-Off that she emailed the complaints committee, stressing the seriousness of the situation and referencing the alleged sexual assault. Now, Simon Mitchell is the second person from Labour's investigating panel to contradict those claims. Simon Mitchell is key in all of this, one of just 3 Labour members who made up the investigation committee that heard directly from the complainants, including the woman known as Sarah. Mr Mitchell, a lawyer himself, issued a categorical statement via his lawyers. The phrases used add up to one thing: someone is not telling the truth. In respect of the claims detailed by Sarah, the lawyer's covering letter says, regrettably, the statements made by her are untrue. A forensic computer expert has formally examined Mr Mitchell's computer. His lawyer says that examination shows he did not receive this information in emails from Sarah, and any suggestion by her that he did is not credible. These are Simon Mitchell's words, but not his voice.
When the complainant met with the panel, she read from a document when taking us through her concerns. She did not provide us with a copy of that document. At no point did she say that she had been sexually assaulted or tell us about the events that are described in the Spin-Off article.
That meeting was March 9th. Mr Mitchell says he got an email from Sarah that morning. It didn't contain any of the attachments she claims were sent. And he says he's since re-examined the document that was sent, and it doesn't contain any details of the sexual assault that's been detailed in the media. There was a follow-up meeting.
I met with the complainant again on the 29th of May 2019 to clarify the allegations and the matters that we were investigating. At no time during that meeting did she say that she had been sexually assaulted by the subject of the complaint or disclose the events that are the subject of the Spin-Off article.
Simon Mitchell says he followed up with the complainant again because she said she'd provide more information, other documentation.
On the 11th of June 2019, the complainant sent me an email with 3 attachments, including what she refers to as her testimony. Neither the testimony nor the other attachments contain any reference to a sexual assault on her or disclose the events that are the subject of the Spin-Off article.
And Mr Mitchell maintains the complainant even thanked the 3-person investigation panel.
On the 17th of June 2019, after being advised of the outcome, the complainant emailed me and the other members of the panel thanking us for our hard work.
Since the allegation of sexual assault and the key complainant have surfaced in the media, Simon Mitchell says he's gone back and checked exactly what he received from the complainant via email.
On becoming aware of the complainant's allegation that she had provided me with details of the assault on her, both in person and in attachments to emails sent to me on 9 March and 11 June 2019, I've had my computer system forensically examined. There is no evidence of any attachment being sent to me on 9 March 2019.
2 of the 3 members of the Labour investigation panel have now spoken out, directly contradicting the claims of at least 2 complainants. Here's one of the other panel members, Hane Heme, speaking to Checkpoint last week.
Did anyone that appeared before your panel mention the words sexual assault or sexual abuse?
No. And certainly not the key person that is talking to the media. I was to investigate bullying. It was about bullying and the behaviours around that. The narrative is that there's a big, huge cover-up. You know, if people knew me, they know that I wouldn't stand for a bloody cover-up.
The man at the centre of the allegations resigned last week from his job at Parliament, but insists he has done nothing wrong. The Labour Party president, Nigel Harworth, also resigned last week, but stands by his claim that no sexual assault complaint was made to the party. The only thing that seems clear now is not everybody can be telling the truth. Meanwhile, Jacinda Ardern has detailed how she and Labour plan to investigate the sexual assault allegations that have rocked the party. The Prime Minister outlined a short time ago what would happen with the review being conducted by QC Maria Dew.
Terms of reference have been agreed alongside the complainants. The terms of reference will not be released because complainants have asked that they not be, as well as the respondent. That process will be a place where those who have come forward to the party can be heard, and that includes all of the issues that they have raised. Maria Dew QC has indicated that she does not believe that her process is the place to take a look at what the Labour Party did with the complaints when they were received, nor the handling of them. That is fair. She wants to be focused on hearing the substance, not whether Labour behaved appropriately. So she will rightly focus solely on the complainants and their complaints. Therefore, the second action that has been taken. The Labour Party's lawyers, Kentington Swan, had nearly completed a piece of work on whether the Labour Party behaved appropriately in the handling of the complaints. They will now hand that report over to an independent third-party reviewer who will establish a statement of facts around the party process and what complaints were received. This will be based on documents rather than testimony or interviews to avoid complainants having to engage in multiple processes.
Jacinda Ardern also says an experienced victims advocate will be appointed to work with the party to ensure a similar incident doesn't happen again. The Labour leader also says that she will meet with the complainants and is working with 2 survivor advocates who are in the process of making contact with them. It is almost 17 minutes after 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The former Defence Force chief has admitted providing inaccurate information to the Beehive about allegations of civilian deaths during an SAS-led raid in Afghanistan. Sir Jerry Mataparai was appearing at the Operation Burnham inquiry, which is investigating claims made in a book by Nikki Hager and John Stevenson that 6 civilians were killed and 15 wounded during a New Zealand-led raid in 2010. Hit and Run alleges that the military covered up what happened. Our defence reporter Jonathan Mitchell is covering the public hearings in Wellington.
The inquiry is hearing this week from the Defence Force's former and current top brass. Today, it was noted an early briefing to the then Defence Minister Wayne Mapp in 2010 was at odds with other official statements. His briefing ruled out civilian deaths, but other statements suggested there may have been. The former Defence Chief, Sir Jerry Mataparai, admitted relevant material was not provided.
Clearly they are wrong and clearly they are inconsistent. Now with hindsight, yes.
Sir Jerry Mataparai, a former Governor-General, says the military would have looked into the matter of civilian deaths if there were serious accusations against New Zealand troops.
The inclination was that if there was a serious and genuinely categoric allegation of NZDF involvement in committing a crime, then we would have sent an investigation team from New Zealand.
Immediately after the release of Hit and Run in 2017, which detailed a raid led by the SAS in retaliation for the death of a New Zealand soldier, the Defence Force rushed to get out a public response. It incorrectly ruled out civilian deaths and didn't link a report from years earlier that had suggested civilian deaths were a possibility. The ISAF Incident Assessment Team report had sat in a Defence Force safe and was found after a Māori television documentary in 2014 by John Stevenson. Former Defence HQ Chief of Staff, retired Commodore Ross Smith, says it was an oversight not to mention that report after Hit and Run.
It was incorrect to reassert that the ISAF investigation concluded that the allegations of civilian casualties were unfounded. What I can say without hesitation is that although our statement was incorrect, it was not deliberate.
Paul Radich QC, who's acting for the military, says there was no cover-up.
Looking back with the benefit of hindsight, there were certainly things that might have been done differently, lessons to be learned. But those missteps do not, in my submission, relate to the actions of New Zealand troops on the ground who were held in extremely high regard. They do not comprise a cover-up. Nothing could be further from the truth.
Paul Radich says the military has openly acknowledged the possibility of civilian casualties. The inquiry will hear from 12 Defence Force witnesses, including other former Chiefs of Defence, Rhys Jones and Tim Keating, along with current Chief Air Marshal Kevin Short. Most of the Operation Burnham inquiry is being held behind closed doors. It's being led by Sir Terence Arnold and Sir Geoffrey Palmer, and they'll report back to the Attorney-General by the end of December. In Wellington for Checkpoint, Court Jonathan Mitchell, Tēnei.
A large scrub fire is burning in Dunedin's Western Hills, prompting the evacuation of several homes. The fire took hold on the popular Pineapple Track in Dunedin's Flagstaff area shortly before 1 o'clock this afternoon. Our Otago Southland reporter Tim Brown is near the scene and joins us now on the phone. Hi Tim, what is the latest there?
Good evening, Lisa. Well, it appears that the tide has turned in this fire now. There was a very impressive fire front, flames billowing out from the hillside, smoke drifting and blanketing large suburbs, so large parts of western suburbs in Dunedin earlier today. But the temperatures dropped, the wind has died down somewhat, the humidity's gone up, and now it's beginning to rain. 8 helicopters are still on the hillside attempting to fight this fire, and they're being supported by several fire trucks and tankers. Some homes in Rudd Road, which is nearby the fire area, have been evacuated, and at the moment those residents are being told to stay out. But it's simply done as a precaution because the wind is expected to change later tonight. So if it does, firefighters want to be ahead of the curve rather than having to play catch-up.
Tim, what kind of area is it for those people who don't know that part of Dunedin? Are there a lot of houses or is it more scrubland?
It's a semi-rural scrubland adjacent to residential areas. The area where the fire's taken hold, the Pineapple Track, is a very popular recreational area with a handful of houses dotted in the area, but it's right next door to the suburbs of Halfway Bush and Wakati, which are built-up residential areas of Dunedin.
Thanks, Tim. That is Tim Brown, who is near the scene of that fire in Dunedin. If the situation changes there, we will bring you an update. The directors of an Auckland development company could face jail time after charging affordable home buyers extras for driveways and fences, making their homes no longer affordable. The Auckland Council has charged Imperial Homes and its directors and land agent with 42 counts of breaching the Resource Management Act. It had been given fast-tracked consents under the old special housing areas in return for providing affordable homes in Hobsonville, but then tried to charge buyers tens of thousands of dollars more than the cap. Rowan Quinn reports.
The affordable homes at the Scott Point development were allowed to be no more than $636,000 under the special housing area rules, which were created to encourage more homes in Auckland. Buyers told RNZ they maxed out their mortgages and savings to buy their homes and were surprised to suddenly be landed with bills for up to $48,000 for the landscaping basics. The chair of the Planning Committee, Chris Darby, says the council agrees that was a breach of the law and has laid charges in the Auckland District Court.
The court expects you to file with a good evidence base, and we've brought that evidence base after some exhaustive interviews, and we've come through this extremely thoroughly, and we are confident that we have got a strong case now.
RNZ's reached out to Imperial Homes lawyers for a comment today. Earlier this year, they said it was entitled to charge extra for the landscaping because the affordability rules referred only to the dwellings themselves. It said the extra charges had been made clear to buyers in sales and purchase agreements. But the buyers told RNZ the landscaping bills were not optional and Imperial actively pursued them for the payments. And they were also critical of how long the council took to act. Mr Darby says he feels for the vulnerable first home buyers and as soon as he found out about the situation, took it very seriously.
We discussed it at the highest part of this council, both politically, myself and Mayor Phil Goff, and with the Chief Executive, and that's led us to this action.
The maximum penalty for the company is $600,000, while the directors and land agent face $300,000 or 2 years imprisonment if found guilty. Buyers contacted today say they're relieved to hear about the charges, but some have been told they won't be included in the prosecution because their complaints didn't meet the legal requirements. Mr Darby says the council's looking at separate legal action for them. I tāmaki makaurau mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi ko Rowan Quinn tēnei.
Czech drug smuggler Karel Schrubeck has told the Parole Board prison has been the hardest time of his life, but he's teaching yoga and trying to stay positive as he seeks an early release. The professional kickboxer, also known as Jan Antalik, is serving an almost 6-year prison sentence for importing 5 kilograms of ecstasy. He's earmarked for deportation on release after the immigration minister backtracked on a botched decision to grant him residency last year. But as he told the Parole Board today, he intends to stay and build a life outside of bars. Annika Smith was there and joins us now. Annika, what did Karel Schrubeck tell the Parole Board?
Well, Karel Schrubeck up until this point has shown little, if any, remorse for his offending. Today he told the Parole Board, though, that he'd made a terrible mistake and now knew that there were no shortcuts in life. He explained that his time in prison had been the hardest time of his life, but he was actually running yoga classes and trying to stay positive while connected to a support group, and also working towards possibly working in the building industry on his release.
And what kind of questions did the board ask him?
Well, panel convener Sir Ron Young asked about Schrubeck's remorse, given the fact that he took every opportunity to deny the offending, pleading not guilty to importing the ecstasy and also taking his case to the Court of Appeal. He said Schrubeck told the panel that he was doing anything he could to avoid jail and now knew that he felt sorry for what he had done. He was also asked to explain how he obtained $160,000 that was confiscated as criminal proceeds. He told the panel that the money was clean. He'd earned it through cash he'd won in fights. Many will know that he's a professional kickboxer, through personal training sessions and also through his parents. He claimed that he'd got legal advice at the time to surrender the money because it was too expensive to dispute that it was gained legally.
And obviously there's this parallel issue around his potential extradition. Did that come up?
Yeah, it did come up. It was a key talking point. He's wanted in the Czech Republic for charges of disorderly conduct and attacking a police officer, among other things. There's also an outstanding jail sentence that needs to be served. So there are 2 international arrest warrants. He's aware of this now, but disputed fleeing the Czech Republic to avoid those charges. He said when he left his home country, he was a free man, and until recently as his first parole hearing, he was unaware that he was a wanted man.
So what happens now?
Well, the Parole Board normally give a decision on the day of the hearing, but they've reserved their decision in this case. They said that there was more discussions to be had. He's due to be released in January 2020, so his release date's just around the corner, but he will stay in the country even if he is released from prison. Many will know he's lodged an appeal with the Immigration and Protection Tribunal, so until that appeal is heard, he will remain here.
Thanks, Annika. That's Annika Smith, who was at today's parole hearing for Karel Schrubeck. Now, he's the Czech drug smuggler who's also at the centre of a deportation case. Up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, why Southern Response had to apologise to Jerry Brownlee's office and motorists brace for petrol price hikes within a week. We would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the show this evening. If you're in the area of that fire in Dunedin, give us a text, let us know what's going on there. 2101 on the text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us a good old-fashioned email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's go to the headlines now with Susanna.
The Prime Minister says the QC the Labour Party hired a few weeks ago to address sexual assault allegations will now focus solely on the complainants and their complaints. As Jacinda Ardern prepares to leave for a 2-week trip overseas, she's still dealing with the fallout of the scandal. She says the party's lawyers have already looked at how the party conducted an earlier investigation of the allegations. One of 3 investigators into the original complaints has engaged a computer expert to prove he never received sexual assault allegations. Simon Mitchell was on the panel established to look into the actions of a man working in the Leader's office at Parliament. Through a lawyer, Simon Mitchell has released a timeline of the inquiry and his interactions with the woman involved. The Ministry of Health has the latest shipment of vaccines will be rolled out to GPs from Thursday. Officials confirmed this afternoon that a new shipment of 52,000 vaccines has arrived and is being sped to the most urgent areas. Auckland doctors are frustrated at the lack of supply of the MMR vaccine. Demand has been high, with more than 160,000 vaccines given out so far this year. There's been a run on fuel with an expected price hike in the coming days. Global oil prices have jumped by 18% after drone attacks in Saudi Arabia cut off an estimated 5% of global demand. Local fuel retailers say pump prices here might rise by up to 10 cents a litre. A ship which will be used to carry thousands of cows to China has berthed in Napier without the required export certification. But the Ministry for Primary Industries says until it's satisfied the Yangtze fortune meets animal welfare conditions, the export certificate won't be issued. The ship has arrived to collect 4,700 breeding cows to set up dairy farms in China. And the Auckland Council is planning to make up to 160 staff redundant over the next year. The council's chief executive says there are too many layers and too much duplication of effort within the council. Those are the latest news headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and it's time for business news with Madison Reedy. Hi, Maddie.
Hello.
Petrol companies, wow, this is the Commerce Commission's report into the industry. That was a few weeks ago now.
It was.
And they're not liking it. Why?
No, so the submissions were released today. So if you'll remember, the Commerce Commission was granted new powers to look into competition in the particularly consumer fuel market. Now, this came after the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern herself, said that consumers were being fleeced when it came to petrol prices at the pump. Now, the Commerce Commission's draft report, which, as you said, came out not so long ago, it found that the market is dominated by three big players in the fuel industry, being Z Energy, which owns Caltex too, and the international giants BP and Mobil. Now, they say that makes the fuel market an oligopoly. That means that there's limited competition. And that's because they also all have their fingers in the pie of the wholesale market through ownership stakes in the country's only oil refinery in Northland, the Marsden Point refinery, and also the refinery to Auckland pipeline. Now, the Commerce Commission found that those companies have consistently made excessive profits for the best part of about a decade, over 10 years. And that's compared to the amount of capital that they're investing back into their business and the industry. It also found that New Zealanders are paying more than the rest of the world when it comes to petrol. Now, as I said today...
I sense a but coming, yeah.
Here's the big but. Now, today, the industry submissions on this draft report were released by the Commerce Commission. Now, Z Energy came out with quite an interesting one there, so I'll focus on them. They said that it cannot agree with the Commerce Commission's draft findings, particularly when it comes to profitability. Now, Z Energy says that the draft report was riddled with inaccuracies, omissions and errors, particularly when it comes to the measure that the Commerce Commission used to calculate the profits of the fuel companies. The measure that it used was called, a technical word, and I apologise, the return on average capital employed. Now, Z Energy says that what the Commerce Commission came up with was double that of what Z's own numbers came up with. Z Energy also didn't like that it used its total whole business profits to calculate its profitability in its draft findings. It says that included the money that it made from selling things like pies and coffee at its service stations.
Okay,
they say that was outside the scope of the Commerce Commission's terms of reference and that it should have focused on only the profits that it made from selling solely petrol. So bottom line here, Z Energy thinks that the Commission has overstated its profitability.
So does the Commission going to reply to that?
Well, in the final report, they most likely will. I can't imagine that they will reply to individual companies in that final report, but that was the whole process with the draft. Then they put it out for consultation and they did ask for the industry's thoughts. They've now received that and they will be mulling over it before they release that final report come December.
Okay, so we've got the latest read on the services sector is out. So how's that looking?
Yeah, this is the Performance of Services Index. Now, it fell just 0.2% 50% in the month of August, pretty much flat to be a measure of 54.6 for that month. Now, any measure above 50 in these sorts of indices does indicate expansion. So the services sector, which is a really large part of our economy, is still expanding, albeit at a slower rate than previously. This is still a bright spot for the economy, though, especially compared with the likes of the manufacturing sector, which is certainly in the doldrums at the moment. The Performance of Manufacturing Index, which is the sort of sister survey to the services one, that's actually contracted for the past 2 consecutive months. So that is certainly in decline and not great news there. But we will get a better read on the economic growth in New Zealand on Thursday with the June quarter GDP numbers.
OK, and so should we take a quick trot around the markets?
The NZX Top 50 Index fell 0.3% tonight. That's a fall of 32 points to close at 10,831. And the New Zealand dollar, that's buying at 63.9 US cents, 92.9 to the Aussie and 51.2 British pence.
Thanks, Madison. Madison Reedy with our business update. Checkpoint can reveal that Southern Response has had to apologise to Jerry Brownlee's office after having sent him false information at least once. It came after a simple request from homeowner Jean Rath to Mr Brownlee, who used to be the minister responsible for Southern Response, for helping advance her log-jammed quake claim. Southern Response sent a letter to the minister's office with an update, but it contained several statements that were simply not true. The government-owned insurer eventually apologised. Checkpoint has the email trail, but now Ms Rath is wondering how many other times Southern Response has misled the government.
For Jean Rath, this old 6-bedroom house on the hill was a dream.
It's got beautiful views. We can look out across the Port Hills, and the best thing is that you walk up to the house. You can't drive up to it, you walk up to it. So there's that real feeling of escaping from the world and having a really cosy retreat.
But come the earthquakes, that dream started to fall apart, with the chimney literally exploding in the February 2011 quake, leaving deep dents in the surrounding walls still visible today. But to have no fear, AMI Insurance was there. It quickly decided the work required exceeded EQC's $100,000 plus GST cap. Things were progressing well until AMI collapsed in 2011, and all the claims were handed over to the new state-owned insurer Southern Response. After a stint with EQC and their claim dropped back under the cap, Jean and her husband Mike Bunce are now with the Southern Response, and their claim is in deadlock.
Our engineers say that the house can be repaired in one way. Their engineers say the house can be repaired in another way, and there's a huge difference. There's hundreds of thousands. There's a $300,000 difference between doing the fix to our engineer, doing the fix to their engineer, and we're massively out of pocket. And Southern Response don't seem interested in settling.
And on Jean's coffee table when Checkpoint visited is the paper trail. Boxes and folders bursting with documents, building and engineering quotes, emails, letters. A grim picture of years of pitched battle against their insurer. Feeling completely stuck, she decided to seek help from the minister formerly responsible for Southern Response, Jerry Brownlee, after a public debate in Christchurch before the 2017 election. She says Mr Brownlee was surprised to hear what had happened and agreed to look into it. After an inquiry from Mr Brownlee's office, Southern Response sent an update on the 14th September 2017, containing this statement.
The customer has all along rejected that the property can be repaired and indicated their intention to litigate the matter, which necessitated additional engineering reviews to be undertaken to have certainty in the proposed repair method.
Except?
Neither of which were true. In fact, we provided them with a repair strategy.
In March this year, Jean challenged this, asking Southern Response,
give me the evidence. Give me the evidence that we have said that the house cannot be repaired. Give me the evidence. They couldn't provide any evidence because, of course, we'd never said that.
Instead, Southern Response said it made these statements after speaking with its claims teams and that it was their interpretation of their communication. Dr Raff disputed it again. But eventually on the 16th of May this year, 8 months after the initial email to Mr Brownlee's office, Southern Response replied via email.
We acknowledge that at no time did you state to Southern Response directly that you reject that your property can be repaired, nor notify Southern Response of your intention to litigate. We apologise for any erroneous interpretation on our part and for providing an incorrect statement to the Honourable Brownlee's office. A correction will be issued as requested. I sincerely apologise for this misunderstanding, which was not due to any intention on our part to misrepresent your position in respect of the claim, but arose as a result of miscommunication.
And in an email to Mr. Brownlee's office the same day,
Southern Response accepts that the statement reflected our interpretation of a variety of communications between ourselves and our customers, their legal representatives and other parties in relation to the claim, and that at no time did Dr. Rath or Mr. Bunt state to Southern Response directly that they reject the property can be repaired, nor notify Southern Response of their intention to litigate. It was not Southern Response's intention to misrepresent our customer's position.
But this whole saga raised serious red flags with Jean Rath.
How many times has it happened on other people's claims where they've misled the minister? Is there some kind of culture there of dishonesty that, let's not call it dishonesty, let's call it misleading. They're either utterly incompetent or they're deliberately dishonest. And at this stage, I don't know which it is.
And the effect of this?
Every night I wake up with my heart racing because I'm so stressed. And I lie there for hours thinking about how can I get them to see reason? How can I get them to actually just look at the evidence? You know, my husband's been on and has had to take antidepressants because he's so bothered by it. We live with my son and his girlfriend. She's been on antidepressants. It's a very unpleasant place to live.
It's not just an emotional impact. Jean Rath has spent almost $150,000 fighting for what she believes her family is owed. She says just this week Southern Response has offered to pay out what they think it will cost to fix the home, but it is not a full and final settlement. And Dr. Rath has a simple request for the minister now responsible for Southern Response, Grant Robertson.
I would like Grant Robertson to front. I'd like him to front to a public meeting with those of us who've been waiting for so long with Southern Response. Because currently there have been all these issues with Southern Response and he's staying quiet. He has a responsibility as the minister to actually come and meet some of us, not to meet the cosy few representatives, but to actually front to a public meeting and to look us in the eye and explain to us why we're still living in damaged homes.
We also asked Jerry Brownlee if his office has had similar experiences with other claimants. He refused to comment. And at the time of putting this story together, Southern Response had not responded to our request for an interview. So the question remains, is Jean Rath's an isolated case, or has it happened to other Southern Response customers? In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Now, Southern Response has been in contact and says complaints are documented in a register. And based on a review of that register, there appears to be only one instance where the initial reason for the complaint was about the way in which a Southern Response employee has represented a claim to a Member of Parliament. They say there could be other instances where a customer has complained, but unless it's the primary reason for the complaint, it wouldn't be recorded in that way. And they go on to say that they have been working with Dr. Rath on her claim since 2015, but unfortunately they have not yet managed to resolve it, but they are continuing to work towards settlement. Meanwhile, a court decision that means thousands of homeowners battling Southern Response will automatically be clumped together in a class action is being applauded by lawyers taking the test case. Christchurch couple Colleen and Brendan Ross believe they were deceived into accepting a lower settlement offer from Southern Response. Their situation is being used as a test case against the insurer. But it's believed up to 3,000 other quake-damaged homeowners could be in a similar situation, meaning potential payouts could be in the hundreds of millions if the case is a success. The just-released Court of Appeal decision means those people will be signed on to the court case unless they expressly advise the court they don't want to be a part of it. The lawyer for the class action, Grant Cameron, told me why this matters.
In this case, 3,000 people will now automatically be in the action. And as the average sort of shortfall here seems at this stage to be about $100,000, it's very important that people receive proper payment.
So if you're part of the class action, what happens if the class action is successful and you get paid out? You obviously have to pay a fee for being part of this. How does it work? Do you give, is it a percentage of what you get out of it, or is there a set fee?
In this case, Mr. and Mrs. Ross, or the representatives, they have litigation funding support from a company called Claims Funding Australia. At the end of the day, they will end up paying or repaying the legal costs that have been paid on their behalf by the funder in Australia. But in these sort of circumstances, there will be a thing called a common fund order sought. And basically, this is what's been used elsewhere around the world to ensure that all 3,000 people do have to pay their share of the legal costs involved. So it's pretty simple. The amount of work that's required to conduct a trial of this nature, once that's quantified, if one person has to bear that cost, it's pretty horrendous. If 3,000 people have to share in that cost, then it's obviously minimal.
Ballpark, what would the collective be looking at here?
We have no idea because it remains to be seen what the steps might be or what steps might be taken by the government. If we go through appeal processes, if there's a lot of argument, this could drag on for a couple of years. We don't think that will be the case. We think the court's already had the benefit of a couple of major decisions saying Southern Response has to pay. This decision is another one which is clearly a setback for the Crown. I would anticipate the Crown will probably want to discuss some sort of settlement option early next year.
So, in your experience, though, are you talking hundreds of thousands for this kind of legal action?
Well, these cases would always cost in the hundreds of thousands, there's no doubt at all. But even if it was $1 million, you divide that by 3,000 people, it doesn't amount to a great deal each. But whatever those costs might be, people are still going to be a great deal better off by receiving their 100,000 or 200,000, whatever they're entitled to, than by not having it at all.
If people opt out of being part of the class action and they decide to settle directly with Southern Response, do they still have to contribute towards the class action, or how does that work?
If they are in the, by reason of the opt-out, if they have been drawn into the action and a common fund order is made, then they will be required to make some sort of payment, and they would have to take some steps to step out of the action. So they'd have to step away and actually opt out in order to do a private settlement with Southern Response. We would anticipate that they might receive something of a discount in those circumstances, or Southern Response would want to discount the amount that it might want to pay them.
So you have indicated that you think that, well, there might be a settlement in this. What makes you think that, without having to take it all the way through court?
Well, several reasons. The first one being that certainly on our assessment of the law, and I think in terms of the legal team that's involved, the QC, certainly the litigation funder and Morris Blackburn, which is a large class action firm in Australia, we've all assessed the merits. We have a certain view of it. The Crown has already suffered two major setbacks. One was in the Supreme Court in a case called Avonside Holdings, which basically directed that this sort of payment had to be made. Recently, the Dodds case has come out and said that Southern Response misled and deceived people by withholding and concealing these payments. So this is just another case which is of that type. We think ultimately on the merits, the Crown really won't be able to succeed. Therefore, perhaps because it's election year too, it's probably a case where the government will want to sit down and talk about how best to resolve it.
OK, Southern Response has got back to us on this one as well and says it's received the Court of Appeal judgment in the Ross matter and is currently considering the court's findings. It says the government and Southern Response have recently said, when announcing they would appeal the Dodds High Court decision, that once we have better clarity from the appeal courts, we would proactively respond to other people in a similar situation to the Dodds. They go on to say the intention of this would be to avoid the need for further costly litigation for customers and ideally to avoid a customer having to pay a portion of their entitlement to an offshore litigation funder. It is about 12 minutes away from 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. As always, we're keen to hear from you. If you're a Southern Response customer who may or may not be joining that class action, let us know your thoughts. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Fuel importers have confirmed there'll be price hikes at the petrol pump within a week, following the weekend attack on an oil plant in Saudi Arabia. Global oil prices have jumped by 18% after the attack, which sabotaged about half of Saudi Arabia's crude processing. New Zealand retailers have suggested prices here might rise between 5 and 10 cents a litre. Amy Williams reports.
400,000 Kiwis are monitoring fuel prices through the Gatsby app, which shares the cheapest fuel prices by area. Its developer, Mike Newton, says he's expecting a flurry of activity when the hikes hit, and he was among those rushing to the pumps today.
I went to fill up about 10 a.m, so it's when most people are already at work, and the petrol station was chock with people, and there's no discounts running apart from the usual. And so that indicated to me that people are expecting a price rise in the very near future and are trying to get in now while it's still cheap.
The Commerce Commission's draft fuel market study, released last month, said drivers were paying more for fuel, partly due to the lack of an active wholesale fuel market in New Zealand. Its report says more than $10 billion worth of petrol and diesel is bought at petrol stations each year, and there are 4 companies that import fuel into the country. 3 of those, Z Energy, BP and Mobil, control over 90% of the fuel supplied. Z Energy Chief Executive Mike Bennett says whatever happens in international markets flows through to its prices here.
Our typical practice is to look at what happens on those international markets for a day or two, because sometimes you can get a move up or down that gets reversed the next day. So we typically take a couple of, as I said, 24 to 48 hours to see what's happening in markets and then determine what that means for the pump price.
In statements, both BP and Mobil say they will not speculate on future fuel prices at the pump. Gull imports fuel to Mount Maunganui, and its general manager, Dave Bodger, says it takes less than a week for international fluctuations in fuel prices to reach our shores. Mr Bodger says Singapore's market price for refined petrol and diesel feeds into the New Zealand market within a week, and the exact hike will be known later tonight.
We're not going to be moving our prices if we can avoid it this week. Look, the first indicator will be at 8:30 tonight when that Singapore market closes. But, hey, round figures, rule of thumb, every $1 a barrel that goes up in price, that's a cent per litre at the pumps in New Zealand.
Meanwhile, the Commerce Commission says it does not monitor prices in the retail fuel sector, and it is a question for each fuel company as to how it responds to changes affecting its pricing. Economist Shamabil Yaqub says the rise will add pressure in an economic slowdown and will have a huge effect on consumers.
Fuel prices are very much in the spotlight. I think the market study has really put a lot of focus on oil prices, and people are very sensitive to it. And also because it's such a regular and expensive cost for everybody. So as prices increase, we tend to see quite a lot of reaction in the way that people behave on what else they spend their money on, but also how much they drive and how cautious they are.
Mike Newton from Gatsby says consumers should shop around even after the hike, as some stations may take longer to respond. For Checkpoint, Amy Williams.
Meanwhile, Donald Trump has warned that the US is what he describes as locked and loaded for a potential response to the drone attack on Saudi Arabia's oil facilities. Iran-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen say they were responsible for the attacks, but the US is pointing the finger directly at Iran, accusing it of launching an unprecedented attack on the world's energy supply. The ABC's Rachel Mealy reports.
In the escalating war of words, White House spokeswoman Kellyanne Conway repeated the claim that Iran was responsible for the attack.
This is why it's so important to have a president who isn't a typical politician, because he and his team don't sit around and say, well, let's study it. Let's have a commission about it. Secretary Pompeo went right out there and pointed the finger at the aggressor here, the Iranian regime.
She says the administration is keeping its options, including a meeting with the Iranian leader, open.
Well, you know, this president and his national security team and Secretary Pompeo, our nation's chief diplomat, keep many options on the table, particularly when it comes to retaliating against malign behaviour and protecting American interests.
The White House doesn't think that Houthi rebels were behind the attack, even though they have claimed responsibility. US security advisers believe the attack showed a level of sophistication and scope beyond the capabilities of the Houthis, who are at war with Saudi Arabia in Yemen. They pointed to satellite images of the Saudi oil fields showing what they said were 17 points of impact, which they believe could be from a combination of drone and cruise missile strikes. Without naming Iran, Donald Trump raised the tension, hinting in a tweet that the US was ready to strike.
Saudi Arabia oil supply was attacked. There is reason to believe that we know the culprit, are locked and loaded, depending on verification, but are waiting to hear from the kingdom as to who they believe was the cause of this attack and under what terms we would proceed.
Confusingly, in a separate tweet, he appeared to contradict his own White House by saying suggestions he would meet the Iranian president were fake news. Yesterday, the Iranian president Hassan Rouhani attacked the United States' presence in Syria. The US presence in the region is an invasive, illegal and interfering one, continuously keeping this part of the Syrian region unsafe, he said. He went on to say that the only way to establish peace and security in the region was to end what he called the US invasion. But even on the streets of Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, the finger of blame is pointing firmly towards Iran.
And assuming it's Iran that's doing it, they are not just attacking Saudi Arabia. They are intentionally saying to the US, we can hit you anywhere. They're telling Europe, we can affect the price of oil. You prevent oil from us, we will revenge.
And that was a Saudi Arabian citizen ending Rachel Mealy's report. Huge crowds gathered in Fiji at the Nandi Magistrates Court today after police charged a man with the murder of 5 family members whose deaths a fortnight ago are shrouded in mystery. The bodies of Namal Kumar, his wife Usha Devi, and their adult daughter and 2 granddaughters were found last month in the Nasuri Highlands after they went missing. A distraught baby girl was found nearby on a cliff edge more than 30 kilometres from where their car was left. Here's Jenny Meyer.
On a Monday morning 3 weeks ago, a farmer in Fiji's Nasuri Highlands found the dehydrated and sunburnt 1-year-old crying next to 5 bodies at the top of a steep cliff. Police reportedly detained 2 Christchurch residents who are Fiji's citizens at the airport soon after the discovery, and after 48 hours in custody, released them with a stop departure order barring them from travel. Since then, the couple have been under virtual house arrest next door to the remaining family of the dead in the village of Lingalinga near Nandi. Now, one of the pair, Mohammed Rahish Isuf, has been charged with the alleged murder of the 5 family members and denied bail. Fiji police made an announcement on Facebook.
Investigators have charged the person of interest in relation to the deaths of the family of 5 from Lingalinga Nandi. The accused, who is a holder of permanent resident status in New Zealand, has been charged with 5 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. He will be produced at the Nandi Magistrates Court today.
Post-mortem findings from the Fiji police indicate possible poisoning, with a substance thought to be ingested by the family. There were no reported signs of physical assault. The baby's mother, Sangeeta Devi, said before the arrests that she was living in fear next to the suspect, who the family had known for decades.
So I've requested the Fiji police to patrol at night so that we can at least, be here safe at night. Like daytime, plenty of people are here, but we don't know at night. He has not just hurt me, my whole family, the whole nation is been shocked. We all want justice. The whole nation, Fiji-wide, want justice for my family.
She says it's unbelievable that she lost 5 members of her family at once and she is really missing them. A brother and uncle of the dead, Raj Kumar, was outside the court this morning among many people who turned up as news of the charges broke, and says there's huge public anger in Fiji over the deaths. He was also at the police station on Saturday when he learnt there was progress, with police bringing another 48-hour detention on their suspect prior to laying charges this morning.
There was a last interview for the little girl, so we were in the station and police told me that we have been already arrested him and he was in the custody.
Raj Kumar says the attempted murder charge relates to the so-called miracle baby found with the bodies.
Attempt to murder is like the little girl was found near the body. 5 charges will be the dead one, the family dead, plus one was a little girl. She was from Australia. She was found on a body, on the dead body. So that's attempt to murder. So there is 6 charges.
Raj Kumar says the family has had to be so patient and is now very happy their neighbour is in custody and will face justice, although the suspect's wife is still at large. But he says he has confidence in the police investigation.
Police, they got all the evidence, everything, because we went yesterday where the scene was done. We went there and we have to thank the lady who feed the baby since they found. So we have been gone there and we just give a gift to them.
The man has been denied bail and the case has been deferred to the High Court in Lautoka with an appearance expected next Wednesday. Raj Kumar says he believes the man in custody may yet face other significant charges. This is Jenny Meyer.
After 6, we'll have more on the allegations of the sexual assault within the Labour Party and also proposed changes to gun laws.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leata with DNA. Nationals Deputy Leader Paula Bennett says it's clear the Prime Minister still has no control over how the Labour Party's sexual assault allegation scandal is being handled. This afternoon, Jacinda Ardern announced a QC will now focus solely on the complainants, while a third party will look at Labour's processes. Ms Ardern says for the sake of the victims, she doesn't want this to continue to play out publicly. However, this afternoon, one of 3 people who investigated the original complaints released a statement via their lawyer saying the victims' claim they were told about sexual assault allegations is not credible. Ms Bennett says this statement is more victim blaming.
The Prime Minister said she's taking control. She's going to right the wrongs. And literally within 24 hours, one of her own Labour Party council members has gone out there, defied that process and made that statement.
Paula Bennett. Motorists have been rushing to petrol pumps ahead of an expected hike in fuel prices in coming days. Global oil prices have jumped by 18% after drone attacks in Saudi Arabia cut off an estimated 5% of global demand. Local fuel retailers have suggested pump prices here might rise between 5 and 10 cents a litre. 400,000 motorists are monitoring fuel prices through the GasBuy app, and its developer Mike Newton was among those rushing to the pumps today.
The petrol station was chock with people, and there's no discounts running apart from the usual. And so that indicated to me that people are expecting a price rise in the very near future and are trying to get in now while it's still cheap.
GasBuy app developer Mike Newton. 8 helicopters are battling a large scrub fire in Dunedin's Western Hills. The fire took hold on the popular Pineapple Track in Dunedin's Flagstaff area shortly before 1 o'clock this afternoon. Several homes have also been evacuated with fears a predicted wind change may fan flames towards residential areas. The Fire and Emergency Regional Manager Mike Grant says firefighting conditions have now improved. He says no homes are immediately threatened, but residents of Rudd Road have been evacuated as a precaution and a welfare centre set up to assist them. Firefighters will remain overnight if needed.
The temperatures when it started were quite high, but they've dropped back below 10 degrees now, and the relative humidity, which is a measure of the moisture in the air, has gone from 30%, which it was when the fire started, up to 60%. So both of those factors are actually meaning that there's been some good suppression action, and certainly the visibility from the city has dropped right back.
Mike Grant, the Fire and Emergency Regional Manager. The Ministry of Health says the latest shipment of vaccines will be rolled out to GPs from Thursday. Officials confirmed this afternoon that a new shipment of 52,000 vaccines has arrived and is being dispatched to areas which need it to most as soon as possible. Auckland doctors have spoken of their frustration at a lack of supply of the MMR vaccine. Demand has been high, with more than 160,000 vaccines given out so far this year, including 54,000 this month. The Ministry of Health says it acknowledges it can be frustrating for practices to have to wait for the vaccine to arrive. Half of the new stock is for Auckland, while the other half will be distributed throughout the rest of the country. Lake levels in an Otago hydro dam have been lowered after a safety review found its walls could fail in an earthquake. Trust Power owns and operates the Waipori power scheme, 50 kilometres southwest of Dunedin. The review found water could spill out of the number 2 dam after a moderate-sized earthquake. Trust Power Chief Executive Vince Hawksworth says the dam's water level was lowered by more than 2 metres as a precautionary measure. He says Trust Power has been in contact with the nearby Waipori village above the power station.
The village is actually quite high up, so in terms of the village itself, there's no risk. But in terms of for individuals, if they were down in the area that we made the exclusion zone, we just wanted them to be fully aware of what we were doing and why.
Vince Hawksworth of Trust Power. The former Defence Force Chief has admitted providing inaccurate information to the Beehive about allegations of civilian deaths during an SAS-led raid in Afghanistan. Sir Jerry Mataparai was appearing at the Operation Burnham inquiry, which is investigating claims in a book by Nikki Hager and John Stevenson that 6 civilians were killed and 15 wounded during a New Zealand-led raid in 2010. Our Defence reporter, Jonathan Mitchell, has more.
Today it was noted that an early briefing to the then Defence Minister was at odds with other official statements. The briefing ruled out civilian deaths, but other statements suggested there may have been. The former Defence Chief, Sir Jerry Mataparai, admitted relevant material was not provided. He says the military would have looked into the matter of civilian deaths if there were serious accusations against New Zealand troops. Call Jonathan Mitchell, Tēnei.
It's 6:05. The Kiwi Ferns prop and St George Illawarra star signing Te Uila Fotumoala faces an historic season-ending ban after becoming the first National Rugby League women's player to be charged by judiciary. Fotumoala faces a dangerous contact charge from her side's season-opening loss to Brisbane. It's the first time the NRLW player has been charged by the judiciary. She will miss 3 games if she fights the charge and loses, ending her season early. The NRLW judiciary grading and point system replicates the men's competition despite it featuring just 3 regular season rounds compared to 25 in the men's game. Sophie Pascoe says the performances of the New Zealand team at the World Para-Swimming Championships in London bode well for next year's Paralympics in Tokyo. Pascoe finished a flawless campaign, winning her 4th gold this morning in the 50-metre freestyle S9. Teammate Cameron Leslie also won 2 gold, while teenager Tupou Neufi won a silver, which Pascoe says shows the depth that's developing.
We've come away with a lot of personal best times, and I think that's really exciting for our team going forward into next year's Paralympic Games, and also obviously for the growth of the sport, inspiring those other Kiwi athletes that potentially want to represent New Zealand on the world stage.
Sophie Pascoe. Lubricating rugby balls at training could be the key to World Cup success, according to Wales. The Grand Slam winners have been covering rugby balls in baby oil, using wet balls and also taping them up in training in an effort to replicate the difficulty they will face in holding onto the ball in the hot and humid conditions expected in Japan. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Peter Lamp on the weekend sport. Can Manawatu make it 2 in a row? There's a window on the world of the water supply in Bangladesh, tainted with arsenic. Russell Scoons and Ollie Lowry on the healing power of music. Speaking of which, we're still looking for your little piece of heaven after the news at 7, the song that takes you to your happy place. Send yours and the story behind it to nights@rnz.co.nz and join me, Brian Crump, tonight on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula mainly fine, a few showers tomorrow evening. Gisborne and Hawke's Bay mainly fine, rain tomorrow afternoon or evening. Waikato to Wellington and Wairarapa including Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Areas of cloud, occasional rain spreading north tomorrow, clearing later in the day. Norwesterly gales for Wellington and Wairarapa tonight and tomorrow morning. Nelson, Marlborough and Canterbury, cloud increasing, heavy rain developing about the ranges and brief rain elsewhere tomorrow morning, then becoming fine. Norwesterly gales tonight. Bulla and Westland, rain with heavy falls, easing to a few showers tomorrow morning. Otago, Southland and Fiordland, showers possibly thundery in the south with snow to 400 metres tomorrow. Westerly gales about the coast this evening and tomorrow morning. Chatham Islands fine tonight, occasional rain from tomorrow afternoon. RNZ National, it's 6:08.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The scrutiny of Labour Party officials and potentially Prime Ministerial staff and ministers over the sexual assault allegations has been broadened. The Prime Minister has outlined a further review to be carried out by an independent third party as she continues to deal with the fallout of the scandal. But the terms of reference and the resulting reports won't be made public. Jacinda Ardern's been under fire for how party officials and senior politicians have responded to allegations against a former staffer. Those allegations range from bullying to serious sexual assault. The staffer has quit his position in the leader's office and maintains his innocence. And today, one of the party officials who was on the original investigating committee has gone on the offensive over allegations made about his role. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Ms Ardern leaves the country tomorrow for a 2-week trip to Japan and New York, but is trying to dampen down the controversy before she goes. The QC brought in a few weeks ago by the party will now focus solely on the complainants and their complaints. Ms Ardern says the Labour Party lawyers have already looked at how officials conducted an earlier investigation of the allegations.
They will now hand that report over to an independent third-party reviewer who will establish a statement of facts around the party process and what complaints were received.
Jacinda Ardern was asked if any of her staff or government ministers will be included in that review.
I expect that all those required will participate and engage fully in the second of those processes. So that's the one that will be undertaken by a third-party reviewer.
Ms Ardern says it's time to take this out of the media spotlight.
My view is that at this point we need to focus the process on the complainants. Continuing to prosecute this case in this manner does not help those complainants. We've now created a place where they can be heard. I'm focused on taking this forward by giving them the ability to confidentially deal in that process directly with the QC and not with the Labour Party.
Meanwhile, one of 3 people who investigated the original complaints has engaged a computer expert to prove he never received sexual assault allegations. Simon Mitchell was on the panel established to investigate the actions of the staffer when they were raised with the party earlier this year. One of the complainants insists she made it clear to the panel she was alleging sexual assault, both in person and in written testimony. Through a lawyer, Mr Mitchell has released a timeline of the inquiry and his interactions with the woman involved. He says sexual assault was never raised with him and brought in a computer forensics expert to confirm he never received such emails. Mr Mitchell also says the allegations were not raised in 2 meetings he had with the complainant. Nationals Deputy Leader Paula Bennett says the Prime Minister has lost control of the situation.
So on the very afternoon that the Prime Minister has gone out and just announced that she's got these 2 processes underway and that she's going to show all of this respect to the victims, one of her own council members that was involved in those decisions has made a statement that is in very much victim blaming.
Ms Ardern says the terms of reference have been finalised but won't be released publicly at the request of the complainants and the man facing the allegations. She says she'd have no problem releasing the independent review, but that won't happen if there's any objection from the parties involved. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Creating a boogeyman and stigmatising people living with mental illness. That's the Mental Health Foundation's verdict on a proposal to include a mental health clause in proposed changes to gun laws. It would require doctors to report people to the police if they think they're unfit to have a firearms licence or use guns due to their mental health. Police Minister Stuart Nash doesn't believe the proposed law changes will stigmatise those with mental health issues. But Sophia Graham from the Mental Health Foundation told me the reforms are unfair on people with mental illness.
The big point for us is that this will obviously, and in many ways, stop people from reaching out for help when they become unwell. If they know that in doing so will trigger a notification, that means that they lose their gun licence or they lose their firearms, particularly if that firearm is critical to their financial well-being, if that's what they use to do their jobs, they're very unlikely to go and get that help.
So there's a few things in that. You believe that this will basically stigmatise people and prevent them coming forward for help?
Yes, absolutely. We know that there is a perception that people who are mentally unwell pose a risk to the public and pose a risk to others. And that's absolutely not true. People who live with mental health problems are about 14 times more likely to be the victims of violent crime than to be arrested for one. So they're being unfairly scapegoated for an issue that actually isn't there, as is the case with so many laws and regulations that end up infringing on the rights of people with mental illness. They are trading safety for the illusion of safety. It makes people feel more comfortable to think that people who are unwell or mentally unwell can't access firearms, but it's actually not going to do a hell of a lot when it comes to reducing the harm caused by firearms.
So to be clear, do you think people who are mentally unwell should have access to firearms or not?
I think that's probably something to consider on a case-by-case basis. Certainly the risk that people who are mentally unwell pose is greatest to themselves, and we know that means reduction, so restricting someone's access to something they could use to hurt themselves, is a really effective method of suicide prevention. Having said that, we're not aware of an issue with the current legislation, which it does allow guns to be taken off people who might pose a harm to themselves.
So you're basically saying that within the law we have, you think there is means to take away guns from people who perhaps shouldn't have them?
Yes, we're not aware of an issue with that. And if there is an issue with that, we would have expected that discussion to have come up before this legislation was announced.
Because the Minister has said publicly that actually rural women have told him that they think this is a good idea because one of their biggest concerns is that their husbands in particular might disappear down the back of the farm one day with a gun and not come back. Isn't that a legitimate concern?
Yes, absolutely. My question would be that in order for that gun to be taken off them with this process would be that they would have to go to their doctor, go to their health professional about a mental health problem. And would they do so knowing that in doing so they would have their firearms taken off them?
So do you have any issue with the expertise of GPs, for example? Because when you seek a licence, you're going to have to nominate a medical practitioner. I'm presuming that most people will put their doctor down. They are professionals working in the area of health. Why shouldn't they have a responsibility to disclose this information?
For a number of reasons, the first being that you need to have a relationship of trust between you and your patient to make sure that they do feel comfortable coming and talking to you when they are experiencing some distress. Other concerns that I imagine you would get more information from health providers include them being completely overloaded and the risk that this creates to them. I think that people would almost certainly err on the side of caution and over-report if they risk consequences for not doing so. And there are issues with bias within the health system and within the justice system, and I think that the legislation as written would probably compound that.
What do you mean? What bias do you think would be compounded?
There's pretty solid evidence that there is an issue with racial bias in both the health system and the justice system. So Māori and Pacifica are almost certainly be more likely to have their guns removed because there is a perception that they can be more violent, that they are more violent, that they create more of a risk to the community. So, and often, particularly in rural communities, Māori depend on guns for their livelihood. If they're hunting, if they're farming and things like that, they may then be more likely to have firearms without a licence and then be penalised for that. The sort of compound issues of those concerns have not been addressed with this legislation.
You'll be aware that other professions face scrutiny in this area. Like, for example, pilots. When you get your pilot's licence, there is an element of a mental health assessment there. So someone got in contact saying that they had to provide mental health information for a transport licence. So why not for a gun licence? Why should that be treated differently?
Well, firstly, we don't necessarily agree that the ways that those particular licences or industries are regulated in regards to mental health are fair or effective, or do what they sort of say they do on the tin, which is to keep people safer. There is no reason that a pilot cannot have a lived experience of mental distress and still be a good pilot. I think that we definitely are not saying, the Foundation is absolutely not opposed to tightening gun laws. We're just opposed to legislation and rhetoric that scapegoats people who experience mental illness and discourages them from seeking the help that they deserve.
Do you think this legislation, if it's changed in this way, would scapegoat people with mental health issues?
Yes, we do believe so.
Were you consulted? Was the Mental Health Foundation consulted? Did the police minister talk to you about this, or anyone from government?
No.
And what do you think of that?
Well, we would have expected that if this legislation is in response to a problem, if they're not solving a problem that doesn't exist, if there is a problem with people with mental illness posing harm to others with firearms or otherwise, we would have expected that to be raised in a way that was sort of more solutions-focused. Gun control should be fact-based and focus on the research that shows what reduces the harm caused by guns, not sort of reinforcing myths and making boogeymen out of people with mental illness.
Sophia Graham from the Mental Health Foundation there. It is 19 minutes after 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. A jury will have to decide whether a confession from accused killer David Little was genuine or not. Appearing in the Wellington High Court 11 months after his previous trial was called off, Mr Little is accused of killing Whanganui man Brett Hall in May 2011. His body has never been found. Ben Strang reports.
The Crown says David Little shot his friend Brett Hall in a dispute over money. Mr Little had been hired to build Mr Hall a house on a rural Whanganui property. But the lawyer for the Crown, Michelle Wilkinson-Smith, says Mr Little was spending money destined for building materials on his day-to-day living costs. Because Mr Hall wanted his money back, she says tensions escalated.
David Little shot Brett Hall. Unable to carry the body and desperate to cover up what he had done, he put the body on a tarpaulin, he said, and cut it into 2 pieces. He carried it away in his car in black plastic rubbish bags.
Mrs Wilkinson-Smith says Mr Little later admitted to his crime.
3 years later, there was an undercover operation, and David Little confessed to the undercover officers that he had killed Mr Hall. He repeated his confession when he was finally arrested. After his arrest, he said he was glad to get it off his chest.
But the defence, led by Christopher Stevenson, says that confession was coerced by undercover police officers, offering to fix Mr Little's financial woes. Addressing the jury of 6 men and 6 women, Mr Stevenson said officers were told a story and nothing more.
I bet you didn't think that coming along here on a Monday you'd be hearing stories about murder and shooting and a body being cut in half, and as Madam Prosecutor said, allegedly put in the back of a car and outside the family home over a weekend. Couldn't be put away or disposed of apparently because there were family matters to attend to.
Mr Stevenson says Mr Little was a father who sold chocolates to raise money for his daughter's school trips, and the financial pressures led to his false confession.
If you think that some of it sounds slightly outlandish or far-fetched, that's because it is. Because none of that happened. David Little did not kill Brett Hall.
David Little was in tears as his lawyer addressed the jury and detailed the financial pressures he was under. It's those same pressures the Crown says led to Brett Hall's murder, and they say the confession came as a relief to Mr Little after keeping the secret for 3 years. Justice Gillian Mellon told the jury that they'll have to decide if Mr Little's confessions were true.
First, it is important that you know that Mr Little says he was lying when he made those admissions. Whether he was lying to the undercover officers will be one of the key, or perhaps the key question for you at the end of the day. Secondly, it is important for you to know that people do make false confessions. That is a fact.
The trial at the Wellington High Court is expected to take up to 10 weeks. For Checkpoint, Ben Strang.
The former British Prime Minister David Cameron has accused the current Prime Minister Boris Johnson of never believing in Brexit. In an extract from his memoirs, Mr Cameron says Mr Johnson only campaigned to leave the European Union to further his political career. Here's the BBC's Peter Saul.
In this extract from David Cameron's memoir, published in the Sunday Times, he reflects on attempts to persuade other senior Conservatives to back Remain, most notably Boris Johnson. Mr Cameron says the then backbencher was the most popular politician in the country, and after a game of tennis, he offered Mr Johnson the job of Defence Secretary as an incentive to join the campaign. Boris Johnson is said to have agonised over the decision, even suggesting at one point that there could be a second referendum if Leave won. He made his mind up, or so claims David Cameron, after seeing Michael Gove come out for Leave. Mr Johnson wanted to claim the title of Darling of the Conservative Party for himself. Downing Street has declined to comment, but the Brexit Secretary, Stephen Barclay, told Sky News that the Prime Minister was fully committed to the cause.
He led the campaign, and you'll recall, Sophie, at the time, the Remain side was expected to win, so the more prudent thing, if someone was looking purely at their career, would have been to back Remain.
David Cameron appears even more upset with Michael Gove's conduct. The two men were close friends, and Mr Cameron claims that Mr Gove promised to give just one speech if he opted to leave. Instead, the then Justice Secretary, in David Cameron's words, became an ambassador for the post-truth age and a foam-flecked Faragist. But it was the behaviour of the then Employment Minister, now Home Secretary, Priti Patel, that shocked Mr Cameron the most. He writes that she used every announcement, interview and speech to hammer the government on immigration, even though she was part of that government. Priti Patel preferred to let bygones be bygones.
And I was a minister in David Cameron's government, and it was a privilege to serve in that government, and I enjoyed working with him and many of my colleagues. Obviously, you know, the referendum has happened, we've all moved on, and the fact of the matter is we're now working to deliver that referendum mandate. That is so important. There is no point going over the past.
It's now more than 3 years since David Cameron resigned. He's chosen now, with the UK at a crucial juncture, to break his silence. With more extracts due in the coming weeks, there could be more headaches to come for those whose political careers are yet to be consigned to the history books.
Peter Saul in London. The Far North iwi Ngāti Kahu has banned a replica of Captain Cook's ship, the Endeavour, from docking in Manganui as part of a national commemoration marking 250 years since Cook's arrival. The site was included in the Tuia 250 programme as one of several stop-off destinations for a fleet of ships set to voyage around the country. Tianiwa Hurihanganui reports.
Tuia 250 will see a flotilla of Pacific and European vessels, including the replica of the Endeavour, journey around New Zealand to all the places Captain Cook visited during his travels in 1769. But when the chief executive of Ngāti Kahu, Anahera Herbert Graves, saw Mangonui at Doubtless Bay included in the list of destinations, she was shocked.
They never approached Ngāti Kahu. Around about 4 or 5 months ago, we saw the program come out, and the three hapu who have mana whenua over Mangonui were very strong in their opposition, said, "No way, Jose." And I was instructed to let them know, which I did.
The Ministry of Culture and Heritage has since removed the site from the program, but Ms Herbert Graves says her people cannot fathom why the ministry wants to commemorate Captain Cook's arrival here.
He was a barbarian. Wherever he went, like most of the people of that time of imperial expansion, there were murders, there were abductions, there were rapes. He didn't discover anything down here. And we object to Tuia 250 using euphemisms like encounters and meetings to disguise what were actually invasions.
The Ministry of Culture and Heritage's Deputy Chief Executive, Tamsin Evans, says Mangonui was earmarked as a destination because it's the home of the late Waka Haurua expert Sir Hector Busby. She says the ministry thought it had sufficient iwi support following talks with a single iwi representative.
I think the ministry engaged with a small community organisation called the Doubtless Bay Promotions Trust, on which there was somebody in an iwi liaison role.
Why didn't you consult directly with Ngāti Kahu?
I think because it was felt sufficient that through the Promotions Trust we had a wider engagement with the community, which included someone who we believed was liaising with iwi.
Tamsin Evans says while there has been some opposition to the voyage, most communities want to take part in the event.
We always knew that Tuia would cause some mixed responses. We fully appreciate the mamai and the hurt that exists very, very strongly still in some communities. Our job is to open the books, let's look at all the history, and let's start to talk about this. What I hope people will see through the voyage, a visual spectacle and an experience that captures our dual heritage but makes us think about our shared future.
The voyage will start in Gisborne on the 5th of October, where representatives of the local iwi Rongo Whakaata will talk about what happened when Captain Cook arrived on their shores on that day 250 years ago. For Checkpoint, I'm Tianiwa Hurihanganui.
And finally tonight, a California woman has taken a dream to a whole new level. After dreaming she'd swallowed her engagement ring to protect it from some bad guys, Gina Evans woke up to find she actually had. CNN's Rena McConnell has her story.
Jenna Evans can't help but blush when she talks about her fiancé, Bobby.
We've been together for 5.5 years.
Quite a long time to get the ring of her dreams from the man of her dreams.
I designed it and I picked all the stones and everything.
But this 3-stone band of love ended up in a dark place.
I was having a dream that we were on a cargo train and it was a dangerous situation, and Bobby told me, you have to swallow your ring.
Her 007 dream world became a real-life emergency.
When I woke up and it was not on my hand, I knew exactly where it was.
Where was it?
It was in my stomach.
The couple felt panic, hilarity, then a little bit of both. At 8 a.m., they rushed into urgent care and explained her bizarre situation.
I wish I could have seen their faces.
The x-ray confirmed her story.
It's very clear. There's no looking for it. It's just right there.
Her gastroenterologist suggested an emergency endoscopy.
I was really happy because I don't know if I'd ever be able to look at it and appreciate it in the same way if I had had to search for it.
Meaning let nature take its course?
Mm-hmm.
So she went under, and a few minutes later, Evans was reunited with her engagement ring.
I feel very grateful that I got it back and that it does end as a happy, funny story.
A crazy adventure that gives new meaning to a sparkling bride inside and out, and a reminder to be a bit more careful when going to bed.
I have been taking it off at night.
Just in case.
Just in case.
Rena McConnell with that story, and that's all we've got time for this evening. Back tomorrow at the same time. Have a wonderful evening.
NZ News headlines at 6:30. Nationals Deputy Leader Paula Bennett says it's clear the Prime Minister still has no control over how the Labour Party's sexual assault allegations are being handled. Motorists rush to fill up their cars ahead of a surge in fuel prices of up to 10 cents a litre. And 8 helicopters are continuing to fight a large bushfire on Dunedin's popular Pineapple Track, raging since 1 o'clock this afternoon. Those are the headlines. Our next news is at 7.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
We understand from other sources that there have been contacts between the Americans and Taliban since then, and they're hoping to try to get a meeting sometime. But as you said, right now, the focus is on fighting and not on negotiations.
Live with local, national and international stories and some music with your